Hi, I'm Meshal Malik and you're watching Indus Special. A latest report by Gallup Pakistan shows that in the past 5 years, there has been a 317% increase in the tourist traffic coming into Pakistan to visit its cultural and historical sites. Now, Pakistan is home to a number of forts, mosques, temples, and museums. And all of these embody the cultural spirit of the nation. On today's episode, we take a closer look at what Pakistan has to offer to the world as a tourist destination. Joining us for this discussion today, Yousaf Salahuddin, a resident of a traditional 17th century Mughal-style Haveli known as Barood Khana in the walled city of Lahore, and he is a prominent figure responsible for reviving cultural and musical festivals in the city. He's joining us from Lahore. We're also joined by Mr. Adnan Saeed, a hospitality and tourism professional joining us from Islamabad. Thank you both for joining us and welcome to the show. Mr. Salahuddin, I'd like to begin with you. Now, in the world, there are many countries tourists have to choose from. When choosing, of course, they try to pick a location that is unique, that stands out from any other place. Why do you think they would pick Pakistan? What's unique about Pakistan as a tourist destination?
Look, first of all, I would like to say, when people, tourists, they come to your country, what do they look for? They look for, architecture, history, beautiful places. And I think we have all of them. We have a very, a strong Mughal presence, architectural presence in Pakistan. Apart from that, we have the most beautiful undiscovered areas in the north. And rightly, some people have said that Pakistan is probably the most, beautiful undiscovered treasure of the world. And so I think that the basic thing that we need is to create an infrastructure or a service industry to cater for these tourists. So far, what has happened with your northern areas, and this has happened in the last, I would say in the last few years, that you are getting a lot of local tourism which is going up north. And that certainly has helped create a lot of, small hotels, restaurants, and areas. The only thing that we have to see is now that people do not, litter the place. They don't dirty the place. They don't play havoc with the environment. That is, I think very, very important.
Right.
Here in Lahore, of course, we have the Walled City Authority. I am the chairman of the Heritage Committee of the Walled City Authority, and we are trying, to slowly, clean up a lot of mess, to restore a lot of, beautiful heritage buildings, especially what we've done from Delhi Gate. To restoring the gate, restoring the Shahi Imam, restoring the Wazir Khan Mosque and a few streets, and clearing up not only just the mess of the telephone connections and the electricity connections, and taking the sewerage underground and the water pipes underground. So I think a lot of work has to be done. We are basically looking at the city of Fez in Morocco, where the World Bank and other donors like the Aga Khan Cultural Foundation have done a lot of work. And we are hoping now we are going to start from Bhati Gate area and start coming into the old city from there. First, we will do this route from Delhi Gate to the fort, which was the route which the Mughals or the emperors, when they entered the Lahore fort, that was the route that they took.
Right. And that sounds fascinating to hear. And we're going to talk more about the restoration projects going on in Pakistan and their impact on the tourism industry. But something that you mentioned here that was interesting, Mr. Salahuddin, was the services industry. And that's a point I'm going to pick up with Mr. Saeed here. Mr. Saeed, how far has Pakistan's service and hospitality industry come in terms of providing a comfortable, hospitable environment for tourists, not just domestic, but foreign tourists as well?
Two parts of tourism industry in Pakistan. We mainly divide them from the 70s till 9/11. And after a gap of 5 to 7 years, then we again restored the hospitality industry in Pakistan and tourism industry from 2005, 6, 7 until now. Now we are again gaining a lot of foreign tourists as well as domestic. So as far as hospitality is concerned, Pakistan is among one of the most hospitable countries in the world, ranked by different foreign clients and customers which visit the country. As you earlier discussed, and the great Salahuddin Saab discussed, that we have got the history of 7,000 years old sites, heritage sites, which are here. And also we have got the mountains, 5 of 14 8,000 meter peaks are in Pakistan. So we have got a lot to offer to the foreign tourists. As far as the hospitality industry is concerned, we have got some massive names in the industry who have been working from last 40, 50 years to give the best of the best services to the tourists coming into Pakistan.
Right. And at this point, I want to introduce another guest who's joined us, Mr. Kamran Lashari, Director General of the Walled City of Lahore Authority, joining us from Islamabad. Thank you so much, Mr. Lashari, for taking out the time and talking to us. Now, when we're talking about this great spike in Pakistan's tourism industry, what do you think has been the main driving force behind it? Why do you think more and more tourists at this point in time, in the past 5 years or so, have been attracted to Pakistan?
I think the very fact that for the first time in Pakistan, the government has put tourism on the center stage, which has always been a back burner, and considered a thing which we thought was something which we could blink at. But now it is something which we all are looking up to and focused and eulogizing, promoting, working on it. So that definitely makes a huge difference. So the tempo, the very spirit which has been created in Pakistan within the country, which is also now going outside the country, I think it's a very happy thing to happen.
Right. Now, Mr. Lashari, something that in the global context of tourism, what is talked a lot about is sustainable tourism. And the fact that with tourism, there is, of course, an impact on the indigenous communities. What are the authorities trying to do in order to make sure that the communities, the local communities, aren't being impacted adversely?
No, I think it's just taking one side of the picture. There's always two sides of the coin. One is that the communities are being impacted very, very positively. It's bringing them economic gains. It's bringing them image. It's opening up their new businesses, and they are mainly the beneficiaries when it comes in economic terms, particularly. You see, these are remote areas, and they are very little means of livelihood other than tourism. So that way it's a very, very happy thing. But yes, we have to be mindful of the adverse side, and which is introducing and implementing the responsible tourism. That is our weaker side, and we need to work on that more and more. The government is already conscious of it. I have attended many meetings, and some of the provinces are already putting in the tourism guards and, bringing in the wherewithal and the concepts of what to do and what not to do. So that's we need to cut it short. Yes, we need to discipline it so that the local ecology and the people do not have any adversity.
Right. Mr. Salahuddin, going back to you and talking about the history of Pakistan and how you mentioned it has embodies such a rich history. Now, of course, living in Pakistan, we're aware of it, but having to tell other people, that involves telling a story, telling a narrative of Pakistan. How do you think that can be strengthened? How do you think artists, writers, journalists, they can play their role in doing that?
Of course, everybody, I think that, like, for instance, I would say that the most sellable commodity as far as music goes is Sufic music, okay? So here in Pakistan, you have the amazing urs of, let's say, in Sindh of Shah Abdul Latif Bhitai. It has 600-700 artists coming for 3 days, performing in the, over there. Now, what we need to do is, like Mr. Lashari said very rightly, that this is for the first time any government has actually decided to take tourism seriously. Okay, so I think what we need to do is, we have amazing festivals. We just need the world to see them and to know them. So I think the government, like for instance, if the Sindh government, for instance, if they invite, for the first year, if they invite a lot of writers and journalists and maybe one or two world celebrities, musicians or singers to come and just witness this, this, I'm sure it is going to reap a lot of benefits. And let me tell you, it is quite unbelievable, the music that that's the only kind of music which is sellable, to the outside world, especially to the, to the West. Okay. Then I think that what we need to do is we need to develop a festival like Basant. We need to make it into a safe festival. And I tell you that I think that the little time that we had, and Mr. Lashari was, of course, very, very, important part and parcel of the, of making Basant into an amazing festival. That, it is a festival which will bring us tourism. It will bring us money. And I tell you that once people, if they come, especially during the 2 days or the 1 day of Basant, they would completely change their perception of Pakistan. And the time that we had, I remember, in those years, as Basant was legal and it happened, it brought us a lot of benefits, I mean, like once I remember we had a Basant for the YPO, the Young Presidents Organization. Then we had, so many celebrity guests. I remember once the chairman of Citibank, City Corporation, who had never been to Pakistan, just come, for Basant. So it was getting to that level. And if had not been stopped today, maybe, it would have been an amazing festival.
Right. And that's an important point you're raising there. How getting prominent figures who have never come to Pakistan, come here, experience it for themselves. And on that point, I want to ask Mr. Lashari. Mr. Lashari, how do you think tourism can play a role in mending diplomatic relations and the diplomatic image of Pakistan, strengthening that image?
The key to any country's image, seeing is believing. Pakistan, we know, has a very limited foreign tourism, but whosoever has stepped on the soil of Pakistan, I haven't met one person who hasn't changed his image in a positive way. And so the main thing is how to bring more and more people in Pakistan. And the rest is all laid out. We are very warm-hearted, hospitable people with huge diversity and richness in every sense. But the main thing is still a challenge, and that is how to get more and more foreigners come to Pakistan. If that happens, I tell you, it will build our diplomatic relations. It will make our image and perception much better, and it will provide people to socially be cohesive, to know each other, and to blend into the world culture. So that is so important for both for us and for the world. And we must make some very conscious efforts to have more conventions, more festivals, more occasions where we bring in people in larger numbers.
Right. On that point, thank you so much, Mr. Kamran, for joining us and talking to us. Mr. Salahuddin, just a last question to you. Now, there are 6 UNESCO World Heritage Sites within Pakistan, and UNESCO states itself that World Heritage Sites belong to all the peoples of the world, irrespective of the territory on which they are located. Now, what do you think that these sites, Mohenjo-daro, the Buddhist ruins the forts, all these sites, what do they offer to the world?
Religious, what you can call it, the religious tourism. We have a very, very, important and amazing sites, and the government is starting, and a little bit of work was done in the previous government also. But now they are taking it more seriously, that how to, like for instance, if, for instance, we have the Katas Raj temple, okay? So if things get better with India, at some stage we can get a lot of tourism from India as well. But then again, like I said, that if we get such large turnout in tourism, do we have the service industry to service it? So I think that we need to build that industry also. And of course, I mean, Mohenjo-daro and the whole Texila, Potohar range, and much more in the north, the Buddhist. We forgot to mention that, and I'm glad you mentioned that. So that makes Pakistan even richer.
Right. And with that richness, of course, there is a lot of potential to further this industry that we're talking about. On that point, thank you so much, Mr. Mian, Yousaf, Salahuddin, for joining us and talking to us. Mr. Saeed, just the last question to you. We've been talking about the tourism industry. What do you think are the future measures that this industry within Pakistan is planning to take in order to strengthen its cause and to move forward in a productive manner?
As far as the cultural tourism is concerned, there should be two. As you already mentioned, we have got six UNESCO sites which are listed, but there are 26 sites which we have, which are the tentative sites. The government needs to work on those sites with the UNESCO heritage, and we need to include more and more sites so that we get a lot of influx for foreigners to visit those. That's one of the main agenda on which we should be working to increase our tourism for the cultural side in future. Right. And the other side, we have got the north, which is sellable on its own. So we don't need to do much other than just portray and have a good soft image through the diplomatic measures through the embassies and foreign delegations.
Right. On that point, thank you so much, Adnan Saeed, for joining us and talking to us. We're going to take a short break. When we return, we discuss the impact of tourism on the economy. Stay with us. Welcome back to the show. The World Travel and Tourism Council estimates that the global tourism industry in 2018 was worth $8.8 trillion US. It's no doubt that tourism comes with a host of benefits. But what do countries need to do in order to fully utilize their tourism potential, and what role does tourism play in meaningful cultural exchange in this globalized world? We take a closer look at the story. Joining us for this discussion today is Ms. Vicky Pryce, an economist joining us from the UK, and Mr. Ratish Nanda, who's a noted Indian conservation architect and the project director of Aga Khan Trust for Cultural, joining us from Delhi. Thank you both for joining us and welcome to the show. Ms. Pryce, I'd like to begin with you. Now, as I mentioned, that tourism comes with a host of benefits. Take us through how exactly it impacts the economy in indirect ways and indirect ways.
The most direct ways, of course, that you have extra people coming to the country and they start spending money, of course. It's very, very simple. That has all sorts of impacts in terms of creating jobs, demand for goods and services. And the question is whether the country is able then to spread that benefit across, because obviously there are all sorts of sectors that can participate in all this. For example, transport sector, hotels and restaurants and anything else that you can then also add on to the package, if you like. So those are the economic benefits, but of course, for those to be properly felt, you also need to have the right infrastructure so that people can move around easily, that it's high quality, so that people want to come back. And it does have all sorts of impacts too in terms of the way in which a country is perceived. The more open it is to people coming in and taking in their culture, the better it is in terms of a country in particular being able to use soft power, if you like, because it's known, it's liked, and it follows various standards which are internationally accepted. And then, of course, you have the impact on the opening up, if you like, of a country to other ideas, because obviously people come in, they interact, they expect things, and the country itself can become considerably more productive, whether it's technologically or in any other way. So there are all these benefits. Now, we've got to just watch it that obviously there are some environmental impacts. You have to be careful about what tourists could do. They could destroy loads of cultural sites, so you have to be very careful. But you see what happens even in Europe, where the people who live in Venice are now overwhelmed by tourism, and they're trying to restrict that. So we always have to look at the other side too. But overall, obviously, if it's done the right way, and that's important to emphasize, then the benefits both economically, culturally, and at the end of the day, also politically, can be significant.
Right. And with those significant benefits, of course, it's important to remember that there is investment needed on part of the authorities, the host country. Mr. Nanda, on that part, you've been involved in a number of restoration projects in the developing world. How important is it for these developing countries to invest in these projects for the sake of tourism? And how much investment is really needed?
Well, in India at least, there is a wealth of heritage sites, and for almost every country, the heritage sites are a unique attraction which cannot be found anywhere else. But tourists are not coming to really see ruins or monuments in shabby conditions. So conservation of our built heritage is extremely important, and critically, from the tourism point of view, once a monument is fixed or is as beautiful as it was meant to be centuries ago, it becomes a sustainable tourism asset. It doesn't need investment every year, but a proper conservation job once done could really impact for generations to come. For example, His Highness the Aga Khan gifted the garden restoration of Humayun's tomb in Delhi, and that itself led to 1,000% increase in visitor numbers, from about 160,000 a year to almost 1.5 million a year.
Wow.
And that has continued year after year after year after year. And that is the possibility of many of our World Heritage sites. But again, as has already been said, these sites need to be in proper state of conservation. They need to be tourist friendly. They need to be interpreted. People need to be informed what the site is all about. And then, of course, you need clean toilets and signage and so on. But if well done, conservation can really fulfill a lot of potential economic needs through tourism creation, through employment. Conservation also creates a hell of a lot of employment, indirectly and indirectly. And again, as has already been said by Vicky, in the hotels and travel trade.
Now, you mentioned here that if tourists and people around are informed about these historical sites, they can reap immense benefits. And that's a point I want to pick up on. Now, restoration, of course, also means the restoration of history, a history that was perhaps lost in cultural memory. What then needs to be done alongside that restoration process for people to be aware of what that site was about, what the importance was of it was?
So I think what happens is when you go to a site from another culture, it is often not understood what Harappa or Mohenjo-daro, for example, were about. But a site museum is able to relive, and today you can use digital technology to virtually reconstruct what these cities would have been, or any site would have been. And it's only through our heritage that we can also bridge a lot of the cultural gaps or differences that have happened in communities today, because by understanding each other's culture or where we are coming from, I think gives us a much better perspective of who we are today. But you need a site museum to display artifacts found at the site or associated with the site. But you also often need access to modern day technology, which might be in the form of QR codes leading you to a site. And, it's very interesting for tourists to see how a site has changed over centuries. Right. And it also informs the people. Sometimes it's not very easily understood what the real significance of the site is. And it's often not enough to say this is unique or this is the first. But I think intelligent people today are expecting more, to be informed much better, and to come out not only of an entertainment, but also an enriching learning experience.
Right. On that point, thank you so much, Ratish Nanda, for talking to us. Ms. Pryce, now going back and talking a little about how developing nations can tap into their tourism potential. Now, compared to other industries, does the tourism industry hold perhaps more potential? For example, increasing exports might be a long-term process, but investing in tourism might yield benefits in a lesser amount of time?
I think that's right. Depends, of course, on what type of tourism we're talking about. If you have a big country where there are loads of interesting places to go to, then you absolutely need to also invest in the infrastructure. So it's fine to equip people to be able to deal with tourists who come in if you have a relatively limited space in where it's all happening. But you generally have to spend quite a lot of money making sure that trains run properly, that buses run properly, that there aren't any serious problems on the roads, and so on. Also that they're comfortable, air-conditioned, and so on, and that they get you from A to B at the time that is advertised and without any real problems. And I know this particularly because I come from Greece originally, and because we have loads and loads of islands. So the question is, how do you get to all these various islands? Well, strangely enough, Greece is not renowned for being terribly efficient, but the shipping system works incredibly well. So people know they can get from A to B when it says, and the boat arrives at the right time, except when there is strong wind, and gets you to the other end at the right time. So we can't get away from the fact that you need that infrastructure. You also need standards. It's not that simple to say, we're going to have clean beaches. You absolutely need to achieve that, and you have to make sure that all the health issues are dealt with so you don't have any disasters, because the word spreads now with social media very, very quickly. And then, of course, it's skills. And I think one of the great benefits of perhaps focusing on tourism is that it requires so many different skills to provide the proper service. I mentioned infrastructure. Of course, you need to build things, and everything else that goes with it, booking, also the way in which people interact with each other, IT, and so on. So all those skills are very important, and they are transferable. The interesting thing is that it's not just tourism that benefits, but you can then extend it to other sectors. And if people come in and like what they see, they may well want to also be there for longer, invest, and that helps the economy more generally.
Right. On that point, thank you so much, Ms. Vicky Pryce, for joining us from the UK. Now we're joined by Mr. Alex Kerr, who's the author and travel specialist, joining us from Bangkok. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Kerr. Now, as I was talking to Ms. Pryce, the economic benefits of tourism, of course, development is needed, infrastructure is needed, but many tourists want to go to a place specifically for its unique culture, for its unique setup. But at the same time, they want all the facilities that they'd be able to find back home. Now, where can a balance be struck between that?
Where normally tourists don't go. And the reason they don't go is because they're afraid that they're going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be cold or hot, or there won't be a proper toilet or whatever. And so as soon as they know they can have those things, then they're willing to be adventurous. And one problem Japan has that we can talk about in a few more minutes if we have time is many hundreds of thousands of abandoned homes because there's a declining population. And some of those homes are very, very beautiful, built with fantastic wooden architecture. They're really treasures, and they can be reused. They can be recycled into a business that really brings money into the community and brings people into the community. Right. But the only way to do it is to pull those houses into the modern age and to make them comfortable.
Right. Now, Mr. Kerr, when we're talking about tourism, how far-reaching are the impacts, especially when we're talking about rural communities, those that are not exactly in the centers, those that are out on the outskirts? Do they also reap from the economic benefits?
Well, in the case of Japan, I would literally say it's their last hope. Tourism is the saving angel because they've lost everything. The farming is in big trouble, forestry is in trouble, fishing is in trouble. They're no longer going to be able to attract industry. Nobody's going to build a factory there. So what's left? Tourism. And tourism is great because it doesn't use the natural resources. It brings in, if it's managed properly, it brings in people who really love culture, love nature, people who will feel a part of the community and support it in some way. And tourism brings in quite serious money as well.
Right. I'd also like to, on that point, introduce a guest who's joined us, Mr. Klint Janulis, an archaeologist at the University of Oxford, a historian and a television personality, joining us from Oxford. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Klint. Now, when we're talking about tourism and going to all these different sites, and we're looking at the world that is more divided, that is more conflict-ridden, how do you think tourism can bridge that?
As somebody who grew up in a culture that we didn't really travel very much, I grew up in the middle of the United States, so traveling to Europe or anywhere outside of the U.S. was an expensive endeavor. So you get these ideas about what other people are like, what other cultures are like. And in my fortunate adult life, I've had a chance to travel all over the world, and it's been fantastic. And what it's made me realize was, you know, most humans at their heart are decent people. And to get to know those cultures through travel and tourism influences how you think and also how you vote and how you treat other people and how you view, political conflicts and things like this. So I think promoting tourism does a lot more than just bring money into a specific country. It also promotes better understanding across the world politically.
Right. And now, Mr. Klint, just deviating from this conversation a little and talking about the museums and the historical sites within the countries. Now, there is a lot of talk about the repatriation of certain artifacts back to those states to which they originally belonged to. And as our earlier guest mentioned, that those goods can have immense value in terms of becoming a tourist attraction. Many people would just come in numbers just to see those. In this, when we talk about Western and European museums that hold so much of the wealth from African countries, from Asian countries, do you think there should be an understanding in terms of economic terms on how to share those benefits or taking back those goods? What do you think needs to be done on that front?
Absolutely. I agree with the idea that a lot of the goods that were taken during the colonialist era should be repatriated to some extent. But I can also see that there's some value in maybe some of these goods not just sitting in a museum in either Lahore or London, but as being part of a traveling exhibit where the culture is going different places for people to experience. And that might get them interested in wanting to go experience where that culture originated itself. So it's a good change in archaeology that we're starting to repatriate some of these things. You're seeing it a lot, particularly in the UK and the United States. But I think additionally, if there were sort of traveling exhibits, country to country, region to region, that would generate a lot of interest in the culture and the people that produce those goods.
Right, and that's a very interesting idea to follow upon, just taking those goods from country to country and getting attraction for them. Mr. Kerr, now talking about striking a balance between what the economics of tourism are and sustainable tourism, how much tourism is too much tourism?
That is a very hotly discussed topic at the moment, and there are very strongly felt pros and cons. My feeling is that a bit of cost-benefit analysis is called for. It's not only that a lot of tourists come and you make money and that's great. There are expenses, sometimes hidden costs, but there's garbage disposal, there's toilets, there's building roads and other facilities, and then there's sometimes physical damage done. Of various types. For example, there's a castle top here in Japan which had an ancient, beautiful tree, huge old tree. Too many people walked around the base of the tree, tamping down the earth, which killed the tree. That's a cost. Now, there are ways to avoid it. Proper management, obviously. They should have built a fence so that they didn't kill the tree. That's one way to handle it. Another way to handle it is building into your tourism structure certain fees, charging people what they should be charged, trying to get people to go away from the extremely crowded tourist centers, spread it out to other places. There are various ways to handle it. But only simplistically to think of it as, oh, we got so many tourists last year and we made this much money, isn't that great? Ignores the expense side, the cost side of the ledger.
Right. Mr. Clint, do you agree with that? You being in preservation, restoration, do you agree that it becomes more difficult when you have an influx of tourists?
I think Alex makes some really good points there. And if your logistical infrastructure or civil infrastructure of an area isn't set up to handle, let's say, 500,000 tourists a year, you're going to develop a lot of problems, not only with things such as waste and facilities, but you're also going to start getting resentment from local people towards the tourists, which will then drive away tourism. So there does need to be careful planning when promoting certain tourist areas and attractions, because everything is changing so dramatically, particularly in the last 5 years in the world of Instagram and social media. People are seeing places they never have heard of or would have thought about on other people's feeds, and they're wanting to go there and they're wanting to get those pictures. And so I think a lot of big tourist destinations are playing catch up at the moment with the logistics to handle incoming tourists. And I know places like Barcelona and certain places in France are dealing with that, and kind of everywhere in the world. But logistics and infrastructure are crucial to a good, healthy tourism industry.
Right. Mr. Clint, this is something that I want to ask you and Mr. Kerr about. Now, with this rapidly changing industry, the fact that there was a record number of international flights in 2018, of course, this industry is expanding. More people are going to places they've never been to before. Do you see a change in the perceptions of those places as well? Do you see that history of certain places that was being ignored for so long is now coming to be realized, coming to be acknowledged?
I've traveled to places such as in Eastern Europe where I've gone and said to myself, wow, what a fantastic area. I can't believe more Europeans or Americans don't know about this. And I think in the next couple years, as travel shows and Instagram, things like that become more dominant, these places will start getting big influxes of tourism that they did not expect. And I can give one example of Sofia, Bulgaria. 2-3 years ago, it was a destination for English people for short holidays. Suddenly it became a hotspot for Chinese tourists. And there are busloads and truckloads of Chinese tourists suddenly visiting Sofia that they'd never had Chinese tourism there before. And this happened all at once just because of maybe some publication that happened in China. I'm not sure what, but it dramatically changed the tourism industry in Sofia.
Right. Mr. Kerr, same question to you, is changing it up a little. Now, there are, of course, certain stereotypes of people, of cultures that are written in books and, they're romanticized, all of that stuff. Do you think with this rising tourism, these trends, that's changing? Those cemented ideas are changing?
Well, they do and they don't. I think a lot of people benefit from travel, come back with a new idea. They've met new people, they've gone to places and really seen something, and maybe it's overturned their idea of what Asia or Africa might be, something like that. Unfortunately, that isn't the way it always works. And especially with mass, big bus tourism, very often what happens is people are insulated from the environment. They show up in their big bus, they take their Instagram photo, they go back to their country having essentially not learned anything. And so that's one of the key issues, is how you educate tourists, how you lead them on the paths of respect and curiosity. And unfortunately, a huge amount of the kind of tourism, for example, that's probably happening in Sofia right now is not probably doing that. And so that's where you get frictions that hopefully we can do better about in the future.
Right. And Mr. Clint, do you share that view too, that the insulated environment tourists are going in doesn't really change their perceptions of the place? It just gives them a bunch of good pictures for social media, but doesn't really change their mindsets.
Alex makes a really great point there. And I've seen myself, as I've traveled, this sort of insulated tourist style where basically they get off a bus in a large group, they're led carefully through a set of planned experiences, and they get back on the bus and they never really meet a local, they never meet somebody who's not there to sell them something related to tourism. And how you change that is, I think, much more complicated. Some cultures do like the large group travel style. You'll see that a lot with Eastern Asian cultures. They like to travel with big groups of people. But how do you really create personal interactions with local environments and cultures when you've got a traveling group of 100+ people? That's a difficult question to answer, and there's no easy solution for that problem, really. I've been very fortunate in my travels as an archaeologist. I usually end up in very remote places. I work with local people and I get to know them, not just their history, but I get to know the local culture. And that for me is the best kind of traveling one can do. But how do you spread that, and how do you make that sustainable on a large scale? I do not know the answer.
Right, and that is a difficult question, but we're going to have to leave it at that. Hopefully, perhaps try to answer it at another time. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Klint Janulis, and thank you, Mr. Alex Kerr, for joining us. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We will see you again next week with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.